The cameras were rolling. The room was silent, but tension cut through the air like a blade. Judge Lambert leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. President Traoré answered directly. Did you or did you not interfere with the state funds? Traoré looked up slowly, calm, poised, dangerous. This wasn't a courtroom. This was a trap, and Lambert thought he had already won. He forgot one thing. You never corner a man who built his power while surrounded by enemies. This wasn't a trial. This was theater. Judge Lambert smirked, sensing weakness where there was only patience. Your silence will be taken as guilt, he said. Traoré didn't blink. You want my silence? Then listen carefully to what it sounds like when the truth walks in. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Behind the cameras, the world was watching live. But what no one realized was, Traoré wasn't here to defend himself. He was here to reveal something. And the judge had already walked into his own snare. What if the accused wasn't on trial, but the judge? Traoré turned to the cameras, his voice calm. You say justice, but what you mean is control. You ask questions, but hide the real answers. Papers slid across the table. Documents, names, transactions, offshore accounts. Judge Lambert's hands froze mid-air. Outside, protesters chanted. Inside, the walls closed in. This wasn't a defense. It was a counterattack. And every viewer now knew it. The judge laughed nervously, trying to regain footing. This is irrelevant. But Traoré stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The people are not your puppets, Lambert. You've pulled strings for too long. Security glanced at each other. Journalists began whispering, and the live chat exploded. Traoré hadn't just flipped the script. He'd lit it on fire. And now Lambert was trapped in a play of his own making with no exit. The judge reached for his gavel authority in a wooden echo. But it sounded hollow now. Traoré walked toward the witness stand and dropped a single USB on the table. All your secrets. Neatly packaged. Would you like to deny it on record? The screen lit up. Footage. Voice recordings. Lambert's voice promising favors. Taking bribes. The courtroom gasped. But the real blow hadn't landed yet. That would come next when handcuffs replaced the gavel. A bailiff stepped forward instinctively toward Traoré. But Judge Lambert raised his hand. No, let him speak. Too late. The power had already shifted. In one breath, the courtroom became his. Traoré turned to the public gallery. How long have you been told to trust men like him? The audience stared, some in shock, others in guilt. Truth doesn't knock. It breaks in. And tonight, it kicked down the door. A prosecutor whispered to Lambert, "We need to recess." "No," the judge hissed. "We silence him now, or we fall with him." But the silence was already broken. Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, truth echoed louder than the gavel. Traoré's assistant handed over a second file. Want to see where the foreign aid went? Or who it fed? Spoiler, it wasn't the people. The courtroom was now a confession booth. But only one man was confessing, and he didn't know it. Traoré didn't accuse. He exposed. He didn't shout. He revealed. And the more he spoke, the smaller Lambert looked. Journalists whispered into mics. Across the globe, headlines were already forming. Burkina Faso judge implodes on live trial. This wasn't politics anymore. It was reckoning. And the man who thought himself untouchable just found out what happens when the truth gets a microphone. Lambert tried one last move. "I order this courtroom cleared." But the doors stayed open. The guards didn't move. Traoré smiled faintly. "You don't give the orders anymore." A small box was placed in front of Lambert. Inside, a pen, a signed confession, and a choice: walk out in shame or be dragged out in chains. The audience didn't blink. History was happening live. He reached for the pen. But before ink met paper, another sound stole the room. Click. Cameras. Dozens. A flash of light, then another. The world watched as the mighty shrunk. Traoré leaned in, voice low. You tried to break me on live TV. Pause. But the people saw everything. The judge dropped the pen. Not because he refused, but because he finally understood. His power was borrowed, and the debt just came due. Outside, crowds gathered, not with torches, with phones. The revolution didn't wear uniforms anymore. It wore Wi-Fi. Every word, every tremor in Lambert's hand, live-streamed. The police chief entered the courtroom, not to protect Lambert, but to detain him. Traoré turned away. His part was done. The system had collapsed under its own lies. He just held up a mirror. Journalists swarmed him outside the courthouse. Did you expect this outcome, Captain? He paused. No. But I prepared for it. He walked past headlines forming in real time. Traoré dismantles corrupt judiciary. Burkina Faso shifts power without a bullet. One reporter shouted, "Is this a coup?" He stopped. Smiled. No. This is accountability. Meanwhile, Lambert sat in the back of a police truck. His robe creased, his face drained, but worst of all, his silence. For a man who ruled with words, he now had none. Across town, files were being unsealed, bank accounts frozen. All eyes distanced themselves. Justice wasn't blind. It was wide awake. And it had Traoré's eyes. At headquarters, Traoré met with the people, not generals, not ministers, the people. A woman in a yellow scarf asked, "Will this last?" He nodded slowly. "If you protect it." That night, across Burkina Faso, citizens didn't just watch the news. They felt part of it. For once, power had a face. And it looked like theirs. In Paris, Washington, and Brussels, phone lines burned. This wasn't just a local scandal. It was a message. Africa's not your chessboard anymore. News anchors stumbled over his name. Think tanks scrambled to reframe it. But on social media, only 3 words trended: Traoré, justice, Lev, and somewhere deep in a foreign embassy, a strategist muttered, "We underestimated him." The next morning, Traoré woke before sunrise. No parades. No champagne. Just quiet. And duty. He walked past a mirror, paused. Not for vanity, but for clarity. Revolutions weren't won with speeches. They were maintained in silence, in discipline. He tied his boots. The day wasn't waiting. Abroad, journalists called it the live trial that shook Africa. But in Ouagadougou, people just called it Thursday. That's how normalized justice had become. Markets reopened. Children played. A man who once feared his voice now joined a community meeting. Small changes. Massive impact. One citizen said, "He didn't just speak for us. He listened." Lambert's trial would come, but the verdict was already social. His name became a warning. A symbol of the old ways. Statues weren't toppled. They were ignored. Traoré refused to make him a martyr. "We're not here to humiliate," he said. "We're here to rebuild." Forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Weeks later, a student asked Traoré, "What gave you the courage to challenge him?" He smiled. It wasn't courage. It was memory. He remembered the mother who sold vegetables by candlelight, the father who never came home from work, the silence of the masses. It wasn't about one man. It was about all of them, finally being seen. Subscribe now, because this wasn't just courtroom drama. It was democracy live. Comment. Do you believe justice can be televised? As the sun set over Ouagadougou, Traoré stood on a balcony, not as a ruler, but as a reminder that truth doesn't shout. It echoes. And that day, across continents, The echo was deafening. This isn't the end. It's the standard.